a kind of prayer or a kind of invocation, as you said, of the light that makes words stimulate or activate a memory of what we are.
That we leave the confines of a rational map and we enter into sort of a dreamlike or imagined like realm of it's not thinking as we normally think of thinking.
This kind of attempt to name God or name the divine, uh, even though in some sense it falls short, becomes a kind of deepening, becomes a kind of enriching.
Welcome back to another episode of The Ladder, Journeys in Platonic Mysticism. In this episode, our hosts discuss two specific topics. First, they consider how one might graft Orphic theology onto the various dimensions of human thought, but also to reality itself and its various dimensions. Second, the teleological question reappears, specifically thinking about how we, as human beings, might become like God insofar as possible, which is then fused with a sincere meditation on the Platonic cosmogonical image from Plato's Timaeus. However, it is suggested that instead of focusing on the demiurge, as is often the tendency, special attention must be given to Cora, the other and admittedly more intellectually evasive cosmic principle. The question of language runs throughout the episode, paying special attention to the tightrope we must walk between, on the one hand, the necessity and power of language, but also its inevitable limitations, especially with respect to the divine. Thank you so much for joining us again. We hope you enjoy.
Okay, so we're all back from various different adventures. We left off last time talking about the syncretic nature of Platonic mysticism slash Platonic philosophy slash the Platonic tradition. And in the meantime, I've given two talks that I think actually relate to this particular topic that might be a way to start our discussion for this week. The first talk I gave was in Athens on the Neoplatonic kind of mapping of Orphic theology onto the various different levels of thought and thinking and the level of being. So at the highest level of the intelligible, we get this very mysterious way of speaking about the intelligible triad, right? With regards to comparing it to the Orphic egg, the Orphic tunic, and the birth of Phanes, and all of this coming back to the intelligible triad being named the Metic or the Metis as the god that is indicative of this particular triad, and so a kind of cunning wisdom as the very first thing to be born of the one and the indefinite dyad. And so I did that. So there's a kind of syncretic relation with regards to Orphic principles in Neoplatonic thought. And then I gave another paper, which I think directly relates to the entire subject of our entire series, which is the need not just to be demiurgic, right, in becoming like a god, because in the Theaetetus, we get I think, the Platonic telos par excellence, which is that the human being is, they should become like a god as far as possible. And most scholarship concentrates on the value of demiurgic mimesis, become like the demiurge in creating a world. But I also wanted to balance that with the importance of the other divine principle in the Timaeus, which is the Cora, which is not really something we can know or name exactly. And we know it through kind of bastard reasoning, which I argue is intuitive, prophetic, mystical reasoning, as kind of sitting in the beauty of perplexity and allowing it to feed our soul, to give us ideas and new ways of thinking about what it means to be human in a divine world. So, what do you, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. This notion, I think it's Proclus that talks about bastard reasoning, and this nothos, I think, is the Greek word for bastard. But he's just riffing off of what Plato himself says. It's more like dreaming than thinking, So I hope we get to that. But do you want to start with the Orphic stuff? I have questions about that too.
Yeah,
Um,
either way.
the Orphic stuff, you call it the intelligible triad. Um, what we're picking up from, if I'm not mistaken, is basically what Proclus and Damascus say about the Orphic material.
Mhm.
So that's a little, it's always struck me as kind of mysterious as to what they're drawing from. And I suppose it remains somewhat of a mystery to us what they're drawing from, but they're drawing from something.
Mm.
And there were stories about, Phanes and the egg and the birth of Metis and all that. Have you given thought to, and I know this sounds more like a pedantic question, but what is it that they're drawing from? What's their source, do you think?
Well, of course, it's, all the Orphic poetry, the rhapsodes, right? But also blending it with the Chaldean oracles. Because, Proclus and Damascus say that, there's, of course, the philosophical virtue where we're explaining all the various different levels of contemplation and getting to the highest. But when you get to the intelligible triad, which is the one right next to trying to go beyond being, right? The very first, both Hermias, Syrianus, Proclus, they all emphasize that you have to become hierophantic, right? You have to become like Orpheus, right? You have to leap into the abyss, as Nietzsche would say, because ultimately the philosopher has to be surpassed. And so you have to go into this kind of poetic mode and knowing, right? And so one of the things I was arguing is that all of them seem to say, oh, we really can't name or talk about this ineffable. It's too close, it's too simple. But then all of them proceed to talk about it, right? They all proceed to use Orphic theologies in order to talk about it. And how? Why? Because basically what they argue, or at least Proclus argues in the commentary on the Cratylus, is that those names are like instruments of the demiurge, right? That ultimately we can have these divine names, but if we know that it's not the name, right? It's something liminal that kind of lights up the naming and inspires that desire to go beyond, then we can talk about it, knowing that we're not really talking about it. And so here, this kind of weird speaking of the unsayable that can come through things like the Chaldean oracles or the Orphic rhapsodes. And so
That you just touched on, like, he's kind of slid over a kind of a fathomless abyss there very kind of smoothly, because that's speaking about the unspeakable that you just talked about. How is it specifically that Proclus kind of engages it in his commentary on the Cratylus? I mean, because I think that's what you referred to. He says these names are not, they're not descriptions, they're not information. So
mm.
are they in some sense evocations of some kind, these Orphic names? And they're not without substance, they're not just sounds. So, I mean, what's he talking about, do you think?
Oh, this is what I love is that it really is like when you get to the, because if you read Damascus, you would think, oh, he's fighting with Proclus about where Aether and Chaos and Chronos and Metis, and no, that's the point, is that once you get to that level, you know that what you're really doing is you're just carrying the torch of trying to talk about what can't be talked about, right? That
Hmm. Hmm.
here, there's going to always be difference between a Proclus and a Hermias, like, because what's happening is that they're all trying to talk about this impenetrable chamber that they call it, right? You really can't, but what we have a duty to do the attempting so as to show or model that we've reached this particular level of speaking of the unspeakable. And so it's, again, like you were saying, it's more about the illumination that comes across in the activity of doing this exegesis. So again, to go back to a topic we were talking about last time, the very
Hmm.
act of giving a commentary and trying to say the intelligible triad is Metis, and Metis broken open, or to appeal to a Chaldean oracle in order to help your exegesis say the unsayable, that's part of showing the inspiration or the light, the luminous quality of your thought that isn't really thought anymore, that it's leapt into something altogether simple and different. And so again, a kind of prayer or a kind of invocation, as you said, of the light that makes words stimulate or activate a memory of what we are. And so,
I think
Very
there's
interesting.
an
Yeah.
interesting kind of idea here that what we find in Plato, Plotinus, and of course in the whole apophatic tradition as well in Christian theology of uh well, I suppose that in seeking or in attempting to name God or to speak about the divine, this ineffable oneness, uh, it's this kind of experiential, intuitive realization that only emerges, if you like, out of that act. Um, so there's a sort of capacity of a kind of discursive reasoning to say certain things about these things in the manner in which we are now, but taken as part of a kind of journey or um, movement towards those things is a kind of greater realization. And I mean, I'm thinking of passages like so Plotinus in Ennead 6:9. These then are images, and yet they provide in a riddling manner a hint to wise interpreters of the way that God is seen. Um, so there is something about this, and something kind of initiatory as well, which comes into the traditions we've spoken about. Um, but in a broader sense, I think this is again another thing you find in a lot of other kind of mystical traditions, isn't it? Is that um, this kind of attempt to name God or name the divine, uh, even though in some sense it falls short, becomes a kind of deepening, becomes a kind of enriching. There's that incredible passage at the end of the divine names, Dionysius the Areopagite. He names all these things that
mm,
God is, and this is, but he's none of these things. So it's this kind of act, isn't it?
yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah. I mean, uh, oh, sorry, I was just thinking about how the apophatic tradition in Christianity, and that I think begins with the Neoplatonists, like it's out of this kind of reverence, right? But a reverence that still compels you, as you just said, to act, right? Like to do something, to say something, to make something. We forget that a lot of these Neoplatonists were in communities, talking with each other, riffing on various different tunes, being inspired by one another. And I just
Mm.
find that to be part and parcel of the community that creates the possibility that even though we all understand that we're not actually saying or profaning the mysteries, but we're actually helping inspire that in the student or the young person who doesn't understand the arguments, so on and so forth. That we need these. So the passage you just read, I'm going to assume use the Greek cryptic, right, or enigmatic, right, to talk about this riddling aspect, right, that these things that are signs or symbols, they act as if there's something inside. So the cryptic gets into that same kind of aduata, this chamber, this going inside something that's supposed to be locked up, but we have this weird power to be able to find the doorway or the entryway through
Yeah.
these symbols. And so,
Well, a simple everyday example of that is something like saying, "Yeah, I know what you mean."
mhm, yeah,
When someone said something that you didn't really understand, but you sort of know what they mean.
yeah,
So it's this kind of language sort of points us towards things, doesn't it? Sometimes it sort of names things and is things, as it were, but sometimes it sort of points us, but it points beyond itself as well, doesn't it? And I mean, I think I quoted this before, but Owen Barfield, words are only themselves by being more than themselves. Perhaps the same thing is true of human beings. This sense that language, and particularly the kind of poetic poiesis, the kind of creative impulse of language, it is this kind of creation activity. And so it's not making stuff up, it's actually
Mhm.
participating in the act of meaning, which is something we've come not to really understand language as doing. And I'd also add that, we have to really kind of break out of the mold of how we think about language today to get inside the kind of things that you were mentioning earlier, these thinkers were saying, because language has a very different sense. You think about, I know, Thomas Aquinas, the heart word, and words are not only these, in a kind of more nominalistic sense, these things which just name random things which have no connection to an essence or something. They are really the kind of thinkable form of those things. They are those things, in a sense. But we have this more detached kind of sense of what language is. So I think I would say to anybody wanting to sort of really get into these texts, you have to sort of get rid of that baggage, don't you, of our presuppositions about the nature of language, how we tend to think of words, even the way we talk about things like subjective and objective,
Mhm.
as if they're things which are polarized, but truly polarity is actually a kind of interactive thing, isn't it?
Well, this is what I always tell my students, right? Is that, we can use languages and, give a definition. Like you just said, get at the essence of things. But there's a real sense in which we also want to use language to touch, to have contact, right? To internalize, to be, more than just the being of these things. But and that's the miracle. I tell my students, look, the fact that I can see a light bulb go off, right, when I say something in your head, that means I've connected with you. That seems to be like in this world of binaries of subject, object, one person and another person, where we're all isolated and reified into our own little demographics and worlds, that these words, like the demiurge when he puts the mathematical solids into Cora, like these, it's giving something that allows us to connect, and that's magic. That's a kind of creative making, right? Where, so, all right, you guys are gonna make fun of me. I'm probably talking too much, but I have a kind of weird habit in my classroom, and I guess I kind of do it all the time, of making up idioms because my mind is racing. So I just I can't remember what the real idiom is. And so I end up making them up on the spot. And so one time in class, I said, the loud cow gets milked, which was my attempt to say the squeaky wheel gets greased. But it doesn't matter that I did, like, the point is I was still saying, trying to get at something that, ultimately these strange words can ultimately still allow for connection and communication, even though there isn't a commonality with regards to, no one else has ever said that particular statement to imagine trying to, get somebody to answer a question or something like this. So,
Loud cow gets milked. I
yeah.
don't remember that one though. So, okay, so language does all kinds of things. It kind of creates conceptual maps or gives us guidance and so on. But what you're talking about with these Platonists like Hermias and Syrianus and Proclus and Damascus, they're dancing around or entering into what you have described as the impenetrable chamber. By the way, is that Proclus that comes up with that term or somebody else?
It's Hermias is the first one.
Hermias. Okay, it's a great term. So at some point, somewhere, they give, I would assume, do they give an indication of why it is that ordinary understanding of concepts aren't appropriate to understand the language that they're using? That when they're using these terms like Phanes and nux and all these other things that Orphic, that they don't want you to memorize them as conceptual as a conceptual map, but to invite you into some sort of experiential transformation through the words. But where do they give any hints that that's the best way to follow them or to read them? Where do they say anything like that explicitly?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, that's basically what's happening in the beginning of the Platonic theology for Proclus, and for much of the opening for the commentary on the Phages with Hermias, where they're trying to say that the discursive is never going to be enough, right? That ultimately, at the highest levels of being, of searching within oneself, we're going to have to be more choratic, is how I would argue, right? We're going to have to use a kind of bastard form of reasoning, because it's a need to go beyond reasoning, because reason, you know, the one and the indefinite dyad are not intelligible objects. And the first thing that is born from them, indefinite or inchoate being, as the Neoplatonists would argue, is so simple, so close to the one that the discursive, you know, even noetic thinking is not going to get us there. And
So, and you refer to it as this bastard kind of reasoning, and I tend to think of that as closer to imagination than thinking,
mm,
and that we leave the confines of a rational map, and we enter into sort of a dreamlike or imagined like realm of it's not thinking as we normally think of thinking, and the problem is that the best thinkers are the ones that lead us into this place where they invite us to go beyond thinking.
mm,
And Gareth's point about Dionysius saying that it's all these are the names, but none of them are the names. This guy's spelling it out, but everything I've spelled out is not it.
mhm,
And yet we don't want to get stuck in thinking that the not it is the answer either, because that's just another kind of conceptual frame to put things in. It's not the not it, it's not. And
but this is
I'm
the
one,
infinite,
yeah, go
right?
ahead.
Yeah,
What?
this is why, like, the Platonic tradition is this beautiful, never-ending passing of the torch, right? Because no speaking can ever exhaust the infinite, potency and power of that which is beyond being, right? And so that each person, when they speak of it, experientially, imaginally, like the artist when they paint it, and you stand before that great work of art, and you're just like, oh, like you see the infinite possibility of talking about it, showing it, imagining it in ways that we think I myself couldn't have done that, right? But it inspires us to remember that I can make something different, something other that still gets at it. And so that this tradition is never ending because of that, right? It will
So
always inspire.
So each of us has a unique voice that needs to be tapped into to engage this mystery. And
Mhm,
we can't just say or repeat something that somebody said in the past or have the best sort of, scholarly apparatus to help us repeat what somebody else has said. That
mhm,
won't do it. We have to tap into it ourselves in some way to make it alive.
mhm,
So how can we determine better or worse expressions of giving voice to this mystery? Because I don't think every person that gives expression to it, as unique as we are,
mhm,
is of equally gives an expression that's of equal value. What is it that allows us to see that some expressions of it are deeper or more appealing than others? Why is it that we're so attracted to these later Platonists and their expressions of it? It's because they did it so well. And how do we figure out how to do it so well in a unique way, living in the world that we're living in, which is very different from their world? How do we translate their genius into a language that we can speak today? I'm not sure. I mean, that's the challenge, it seems to me. And I don't think all manifestations of this are of equal value. I mean, some people are just better at this. Proclus was better at this than somebody else, or Damascus was better at evoking the mystery than somebody else. And there are people who are more pedestrian, and they just sort of repeat slogans almost, but they don't really seem to be using those to deepen our engagement with the impenetrable chamber. There's no answer to what I'm asking,
No, it's a
but
beautiful question, though.
these
Gareth,
are the questions I have about this.
Yeah, well, maybe I can. This isn't by no means an answer to that wonderful question, but I wanted to come back to Barfield and something else he said in this poem he wrote in the 1920s called The Tower, which is this sort of poem of self-discovery, of this kind of emergent consciousness. And you were talking about language as having this kind of haptic sort of touch-like sense. And he says, he whose soul would touch the very past must build himself a delicate consciousness out of the dreams of old civilizations, must see with ancient eyes, not wisely peer through glasses of the last 500 years. And those whose soul would truly touch the present must first have touched the past. So, this is obviously just an invitation to something I said a little bit earlier, which is this idea that, maybe one step, Greg, one modest step is just to try to rid ourselves of some of those assumptions and that baggage that we have. But I think it's a really good question about why, what's the, because you're talking here about the sense that we can intuit some kind of measure, as it were, by which we sense that some of these thinkers are just better than others at getting us closer to this thing, which nevertheless we aren't able to say. That's just something we feel, as it were, and maybe we've come to distrust those sorts of feelings. I think partly, but another good question, I suppose, there is why, and in what sense, if we look at this in a more socio-historical, cultural kind of framework, as to how and why certain thinkers at certain points in time seem to become these kind of prophets, these kind of voices for this message. And maybe that's in a film, or maybe it's in a poem from the 1930s, or maybe it's in a a song from the 1700s, or maybe it's a 5th century monk. That these kind of emergences of these kind of messengers, that somehow seem both to give voice to this ineffable and eternal reality, but shaped through the milieu. We talked about this last time, this idea of the particular moments and exigencies, if you like, and lassitudes of the time. So yeah, it's a really fascinating question, and but it's something I guess I'm saying that we see. We can kind of identify that, as you said.
well, like with your poem, right? Where the past, right, like touches us, right? That we put our. So I think I was inspired when I became a historian of some sort by Nietzsche's understanding of history, and of other thinkers need to see that doing history is not just being an antiquarian, right? Where you collect the facts of the past and you write them down, and then you repeat them, but it's to enter into an entirely new world or other world, and to see its greatness, to experience it and to make history living, right, where like it's alive because I can now see Plato through my own eyes and give birth to this living doctrine or idea. And so when Greg asks us what makes something better or worse, like for me, how alive is it to, appeal to that kind of language? How much does it tie in the wealth of time as not linear, right? Where the past is dead and gone and the future is not yet, and all we have is the present moment. But no, to see the future as infinitely alive and the past as infinitely alive, so that no matter what I'm researching, whether it be, about some idiosyncratic decision some doctor made in the 18th century, I'm thinking of Foucault here, like doing genealogies and then changing history because he's focusing on the contingent, right? And all these little details. And so history comes alive again because we see that it wasn't, predestined, that we got, the world of the medical and, diagnostic world that we live in now. No, it was because of random attempts to control. And suddenly, whoo, alive again, thinking about how it is that we got to the present situation. And so I think if I'm, onto something with regards to what makes something better or worse is how much is the author trying to present the living aspect of things and integrating that with themselves, and how much have they read, right? Because reading is an initiation, right? How much have they attempted to unpack and turn in different directions, like so that this is why I think the Neoplatonists had a scale of ascent as far as virtues are concerned. How much are you utilizing your natural physical virtue, right? Your being in a body. How much are you attempting to align with human beings in a civic kind of way of learning to gain that ability to be hospitable and charitable in your own unique way as a member of the human world, and then so on and so forth up that scale until you reach this hierophantic or theurgic virtue, as Greg so adeptly writes about. And
So can you shift gears, Danny,
of course.
to see how your reflections about the Cora and demiurgic mimesis might relate to this? Because I'm not sure that somebody could write with depth about these mysteries unless they'd gone through some sort of Cora experience where they are able to receive the mysteries. But that's my kind of intuition about it, that Cora comes before the demiurgic activity. But how do you understand the role of Cora in this process of entering into the impenetrable chamber or revealing it, if you want?
No, I mean, to touch on what Gareth was saying earlier about mimesis. So the demiurge is not creating a likeness in which there's the intelligible living being, and it's got its own image, and then the demiurge is copying. So we tend to think of mimesis as making a copy, so that there are two things that look alike. But no, the copy is the image, right? It is unique. It is one. And so when we're thinking about what demiurgic mimesis is, it's producing something absolutely novel, because what you're looking at has no image, right? And so you're compelled to create again and again and again. And to emphasize that compulsion, Cora is also named ananke, right? Necessity, this kind of necessary principle that shakes things up, right? She has a movement, so that the demiurge isn't all alone. When we get to the image of creation, he comes across these dimly lit objects. So there's a kind of light in Cora, right? There's already a kind of motion. There's already a kind of substance in her. And what the demiurge does is he, puts his own ideas, and she's also malleable, right? Like she's a good host is how the Timaeus describes her, right? Like she receives, like Socrates at the beginning. Socrates receives his guests and receives their stories that will animate his own story. And so that here, what's the part of Kura that we have to learn to emulate as well as the demiurge? It's this ability to move and shake things up, right? To receive other people's ideas and then to mold them and shake them. And just like I receive, Proclus's ideas about the demiurge, but I'm not going to stick with just saying the same thing, because how I received it looks different within my own receptacle. And the receptacle, or Kura, I believe, within us is when we come to truly understand that the emptiness or the not knowing or the confusion, this is why she's called the mother and nurse of becoming, is because she refuses to let in not being, is what the text says. She refuses, she embraces all of it. And so here, like, oh, wait, if that means my confusion, my not knowing, my sense of not really being is still something. It's that dimly lit something that inspires us to create, right? So here I'm going to become demiurgic because I've been inspired by what I'm confused by. I'm inspired by my not knowing and the impossible. And so that's, for me, is what bastard reasoning is when you realize that your ignorance and your not knowing are the very nutriment that we have to foster as the human being, who has to be both, knowing and not knowing, being erotic. So yeah.
So the Kora, if I'm following your line of progress here with the Timaeus, is that third thing that that the demiurge puts the Ide, the forms into, and they would not be manifest without the Kora.
They wouldn't be alive. She's the principle of life.
Yeah, she's the mother of the world. But this principle, call her a principle now. It might not be right to call her a principle, but it's in us. Everybody that exists, everything that exists, is made up of the Ide and the Kora, which is constantly giving birth. Not like it just happened once long ago, but it's constantly happening. So the question I have is then how do we then tap into that part of who we are, which is the Kora, and then give birth to the world as if it were for the first time. I think that's the trick. That's the demiurgy. That's the real mimesis of the demiurge. It's being demiurgic here because we've been able to become the Kora that receives and then gives birth. And that's the way my mind tries to make sense of this. And then how do we get to that state of receptivity? I'm thinking of, the Socratic sort of stripping away of all the forms of things that we think that we have, but that really are not us. And then when we strip away everything that's really not us, what's left is nothing. The Udania, the emptiness, the Kora. And it's only from that the world comes into existence. That's where I go with this, trying to existentially sort of wrestle with the Kora. I'm not as good at making sense of it in the metaphysical kind of structure of it, but in terms of our experience of it, what do you think? I mean, does this at all relate to where Christians go? I mean, I'm thinking maybe with Christians, it's the notion of kenosis or something. And I don't know if you would agree, with kenosis, that leads to a kind of self-emptying, right? Which is the model that Christ gives to Christians.
And I know Gareth is going to have a lot to say about this, but just it's a funny debate that my husband and I constantly have, right? Which is, he wants a kenosis where there is no reciprocity. It's just a pure kenosis, where I want to say, yeah, it's a kenosis, but the paradox is it's a kenosis that is the bestowing virtue that also gives, right? To where you're not your ego anymore, but you're divine like, right? You're like in a kenosis, becoming so full that you end up overflowing like the one, in ways that, and so it's just a funny debate that I'm always coming back to, because my husband is, of course, explicitly Christian, and here I am, the Platonic, and this kind of tension between this kenosis that is a emptying, being made into the enslaved, into the nothingness. So always thinking about like Simone Weil, being a representative of this kind of tradition, versus somebody like, you know, C.S. Lewis, or like where it becomes a kind of overflowing creativity, and so.
Robert is just jumping out of his skin here for a moment.
Oh no,
He had something.
I love all of this. I think you all are saying the exact perfect things to wonder about. And I just want to read this. This is from a book on Kitaro Nishida. He uses Plato's idea of Kora from the Timaeus in writing about the Basho. Have you ever read or heard about the Basho?
It's a Japanese. Is it in the Zen tradition or something? Or the
Well, he's a philosopher, so he's like
oh,
playing with the words,
Basho.
and
Okay.
it's kind of his own part of the Kyoto School's legacy or something. And so it's this place of non-place. I'll just read it. It's way better than me describing it and stuff.
Mhm.
So they say Plato variously characterized Kora as the nurse, Tithene of all becoming, the ultimate in which and ho for all transient and changing things, their seat, hedra or matrix, ek magion. The character Timaeus, after whom the work is named, explains not only does it always receive all things, it has never in any way whatever taken on any form, morphe, like any of those things that enter it. For its nature is to be a matrix and magion for all things, and it is modified, shaped, and reshaped by those things that enter it. These are the things that make it appear different at different times. And then they go on a bunch more and talk about how it's like, this is really cool, you'll like this. Because it receives the types or ideas and gives them place, Timaeus names that something place or Kora. As all receiving, it becomes stamped or informed by all sorts of intelligible paradigms, the idea, so that it serves as the receptacle of all formations of things, the wherein of their generation and the whence of their passing. But in and itself, Kora is neither intelligible in the order of being the ideas, nor sensible in the order of becoming the copies, belonging to neither of the two genres, intelligible, formal, or sensible material, and lacking its own identity. Kora remains undetermined, characterless, formless, amorphous. So like mu in Japanese is kind of the concept that they kind of relating to Kora, which I think is super cool.
So
That's a good passage.
to connect this all back to the two talks, right? And about Metis as well, right? One of the ways, and maybe this is idiosyncratic to me, is that Kora resembles to me the power of the seductive, streetwalker, to quote Lugonis's theory. So remember that Metis is the mother of Poros, but I also think of Penia in the Symposium, but that's my hot take. But Metis, right, this cunning wisdom, right, of the courtesan or the paramour, right, who is receptive to all the ideas, like so that she can survive, right? Like, and first it starts off as just needing to survive, receiving these ideas, becoming another person for him or that John, and having this power of persuasion and being persuaded. And so this becomes this beautiful, sexy little dance. But being able to take it all in, and then realizing that you're taking it all in and you're inspiring people to love, to feel, to touch. And it's not just, dirty, and it's not just manipulation, that this cunning wisdom of women and the paramour, right, it invites people to be more than just bodies, more than just their ideas, but to be alive with the romance of the beauty of being, and all because that she was never really the thing you thought she was, you knew that she was always something else, right? To quote Billy Joel, right? She's always a woman to me. She's always that mysterious thing that, will become something else, for some other John, because she has that particular unique power to animate it all, and not anymore just to survive, but to create and to make something beautiful.
So Metis, according to the myth, isn't she isn't she born from Zeus in some way? Is it Zeus that gives birth to Metis?
So
Is
yeah,
that right?
so here's the fun Orphic, and I'm so sorry I'm dominating this episode. I apologize to all of our listeners. But
We invited you to do it.
I know it's true. So Metis, right? Interestingly, to use the Orphic mythology, of course, Zeus has to turn to night to find out how he's going to bind all things, right? And basically, Night says to Zeus, you have to, internalize, ingest Phanes, right? Which is the product of Metis at the intelligible sphere. And so, so Zeus in all the mythologies eats Metis, ingests or internalizes this cunning wisdom for survival, this cunning wisdom that makes life possible, movement possible, change possible. And from his head, we get Athena, right? Because Metis is transformed, so to speak, and becomes Athena, bursts from Zeus's head. And in Proclus's commentary, he talks about what Athena is, right? When we really understand, is this dancing intellect, an intellect that dances and traces out the space, right? So that it moves, so that she's part of the head of the chorus. So remember that chora, is also etymologically related to chorus and dance and song, and but here, all remembering that particular idea. And what Zeus did is internalize it. But here, what is Phanes doing, right? Why doesn't Phanes have to internalize, the highest level before him, right? No, because what Phanes, the light, is remembering. Like, he doesn't have to internalize, he just has to remember. And so really, when we get into the impenetrable chamber, we are internalizing the wisdom of, say, Plato or Proclus or Gareth Polmeer or Greg Shaw or Robert Gray. But when we internalize it, then we see that within it, there's a memory, right? There's the light, the memory of the light within that dimly lit space within, as Cora, I think.
Okay. I wasn't able to follow.
I'm so sorry.
No, don't be. That's why we're here having a conversation, so that somebody can say, I'd like to follow. When you got to Metis was swallowed by Zeus, but Phanes is not, you said you distinguish the nature of Phanes from Metis, and Phanes is light. He is the, revelation itself. And he doesn't need to be internalized then, because he is what, go ahead. I wasn't able to follow what you said.
This is why, because I didn't, do it in a logical way. So the first intelligible triad is Metis. The second intelligible triad of life is the tunic, right? Or the shell of the Orphic egg, or the seed, or it's the gestation period. It's the binding, living principle. And then third is Phanes, but it also has 3 levels of Erechtheus, Phanes, and then Metis again. So, right, the whole intelligible triad of all 3 levels, which is the highest. So it's above the intelligible intellective. So we've got intelligible, intellective, and then intellective. And Zeus is all down here at the bottom of the intellective. And Night is that intelligible intellective principle that's closest to the intelligible principle. But Phanes is a product, right, is born from the seed of Metis, it says, right, from cunning wisdom. So this illumination that is at the bottom, or the intellect of the intelligible, the light of the intelligible, the luminous, what's inside that impenetrable chamber is the kind of relations of the intelligible to itself, so that it is the intelligible, is the light of the intelligible. And this is related or called Metis. And so that when Zeus, down at the bottom of the intellect, ingests or internalizes or consumes Phanes, it's actually the whole of that intelligible triad, which means it's consuming Metis, right? And so to consume the light of the intelligible is to consume that cunning wisdom that isn't discursive wisdom, but is a liminal other kind of wisdom that makes it possible for us to quote unquote see or touch the simplicity of the intelligible, not as an object, which is what Zeus does, sees it as an object and then has to internalize it and make it a subject. Phanes, as a product of the intelligible triad, doesn't have to ingest Metis, right, or the seed, but simply has to remember that he's the light of it all, the showing of the light of Metis.
He already has it, so he
Mhm.
doesn't need to ingest it as something outside of himself. It's already
Same-
in him.
The same goes with if we're going to reproduce this in ourselves, we have to recognize that I never needed to internalize. I mean, I did, right? By internalizing things, but at the end of the day, it was never something that was without. It was
Right,
always
right.
this thing within.
It's a sort of irrelevant to what you're saying, but I might point out that in Kingsley's book Reality, which is largely about Empedocles and Parmenides and so on, he spends most of the book talking about Metis as the essential character that we need to recognize as of the greatest importance.
That's amazing.
Cunning wisdom.
A long time.
Yeah. And also he has a play on the words Metis, not something, Metis, and I think that it's the was it the Cyclops with Odysseus and
No one.
no, it's no one, and it's Metis, and there's a whole play on that. It's kind of a fascinating way of making sense of Metis in terms of the Greek literature. But this Orphic stuff is a different stream of reflection on Metis, as I see it. But
I think it's beautiful. I mean, yeah, all of it is just quite inspiring. Because then you think of Odysseus as having that cunning wisdom as well.
oh, he did, yeah, right.
But we
I
should
wrote a review of
talk
that,
about,
and I'll send it to you if you want.
Kingsley's Reality.
Yeah,
Oh, I know I have it. I must have read it years ago because I went through a whole.
it's hard to read it though. I mean, it would take you a week or more to read it. My review would take you maybe 30 minutes of torture.
Oh, that's right. I did read your review of it.
Okay, yeah.
I remember that. That's because
yeah.
you also criticized Kingsley for not seeing how this is in Plato, and that Kingsley has some sort of weird blind spot to Plato.
Yeah, he just doesn't like Plato.
Mhm.
And he sees him only through the one lens that he tends to over-conceptualize the shamanic. And I think that is, you could say, it's a blind spot in him. But he takes umbrage at me for saying that. So be
We
My
should-
dear friend Tom Cheetham is footnoted in one of Kingsley's books as being annoying. And Tom is a lover of Corban, who is a lover of Plato and Proclus. So I think it's that same strain of like too antagonistic against something that's actually beautiful, kind of clouds your vision to like the real.
Yeah, I mean, I respect Kingsley's vision, so I just let him roll as he does, and let it be. But
we all
yeah.
have our blind spots, right? Like, so that's part of what we have to discover is that, I have a blind spot when it comes to various different traditions that are outside of the Western corpus. I'm open to that, but sometimes we have to recognize that, yeah, there's a kind of. So I think about the Neoplatonic idea of leader gods that you should follow, right? And your personal ones, like, and Nietzsche's idea that philosophy, sophos, comes from to taste, right? All these things, like it's a kind of matter of taste, right? That philosophy and what you're going to follow and track is because it's lit up in a different way for you. So that Plato for Kingsley is lit up in a completely different way than it is for me. I think that's a bad interpretation. I can make those judgments, but I also can understand that perhaps what he's tracking or following is lit up in a completely different way.
Yeah, I respect how he does it, but I don't share his vision. I think that one of the things we came up with today was, what is it that allows us to see some of these writings as better or worse than others? And I guess my sense was that what makes things better is that it as you put it, Danny, it makes it alive, both in the work and in ourselves. If it brings it to life, somehow I think that that's our way of measuring it as being better. But not all writings that are uniquely expressed and spontaneously expressed are what I would call better. Some of them and it's not just a matter of idiosyncratic taste. I think some things actually are better, but then there I am. I'm sort of imposing my taste as if it were some universal standard, but there are just some things that are better. And some of
Gareth,
these guys did it.
yeah, no, I agree. Gareth, you want to have some of the last words?
Well, I think we might have to save some of that for next time, because I think there's quite a lot of things I wanted to respond to on kenosis and on some of the ideas of the sort of overflowing and so on. Yeah, lots
Okay.
of things. But yeah, there's just this one sentence perhaps that I'll just read that I was thinking about, which is from an 11th century monk called Nikitos Dithasos, and it's this kind of kenotic kind of activity. It's this kind of emptying, this kind of cleansing, and he says, in doing so, we become vessels of immortal reality. So this sense of the receptivity that we talked about. And yeah, their hearts now serene and at peace, they utter blessed words. Knowledge of things divine and human flows from their lips, while their intelligence undisturbed interprets the profundities of the Holy Spirit. But so this sense that it is this first becoming receptive to then this kind of fulfillment, this enrichment and so on. But there's many more things I'd like to say about all of that, but perhaps that can be.
We'll definitely start there next time, because I want to say something a little controversial to end on, right? Because as a feminist, I have imbibed or received arguments about how Cora and this receptive thing is oppressive to women, right? To think, this is what is the feminine principle, is this receptacle, this receiving, and to push back on that, like when we remember the beauty of that, right? Like that like it doesn't. The idea that that's oppressive, right? Is when we're thinking only like just an unmoving vessel, right? That is nothing, that doesn't take that seed, right, as it is in a love affair, take that within and then make a space, make this beautiful, amazing space, and then create and gestate and give birth to a god or something divine. And that's for me the beauty of the Timaeus, is that it's showing this feminine as not a mere receptacle, but a divine, creative, constantly changing things with her movements, right? That like, to push back on feminists, I don't know why this isn't beautiful. I don't know why we can't see this as something all human beings can do, but that women in particular show in the activity of getting pregnant, that even at the basis of being a material embodied thing, like in pregnancy, women reflect taking something and then creating something altogether new. And sorry, that was kind of gross. And giving birth to it, right? And so like, and letting it be something separate and not her. And to end on that note, I hope that people can learn to see the beauty of that again, and that it's not demeaning or sexist to describe this kind of feminine principle in such ways.